The following podcast is proudly brought to you by Vite Ramen. Use the link in the description and use offer code BROKENSILICON to get 10% off tasty, healthy, and easy to make ramen. And also use the offer code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off Windows keys and die shrink to get 3% off everything else on the website at cdkeyoffer.com. Now on with the show. Broken Silicon, a gaming hardware podcast. I am your host, Tom, and today I'm joined by somebody that, as I was preparing the notes for today, I realized we're just a couple months away from being exactly 2 years away from the last time we talked to each other. And I was looking through the stuff we talked about 2 years ago, and already so much has changed. So I'm really happy to have you on again, a guest who I think excels at extreme overclocking and really testing where a CPU's performance is at different clock speeds. And there's so many more new CPUs on the market since 2 years ago. So it's a good time to update it. I'll let you introduce yourself, though. Why don't you tell everybody who you are, what your channel is, what you're about?
Yes, I'm Max. My channel is Hardware Numbers. And yes, I'm an extreme overclocker. And my, let's say, specialty is a World of Warcraft benchmark that I'm almost the only one that does it. And it's a good way to measure the single thread performance of the game, since it's a very old game, it's mainly single threaded, and I use it as well as a benchmark for myself to compare the architecture, because it can scale with frequency, latency, most important. So, and I'm the only one that does it, and I have a lot of followers for that. So,
and it's a really popular game, so you know,
yeah,
it's kind of like Grand Theft Auto 5. Sometimes I see people get mad when people benchmark Grand Theft Auto 5, and I'm like, well, it's the best-selling game in history besides Minecraft, so maybe you should benchmark it every now and then.
Yes, it's very popular, and it's like almost 20 years that it's around. They keep doing patches and patches, but people try to stick with that, and use it like a anti-stress. So I play some hours to quit my stress about work and everything. So I think most of people do the same.
So
even if it's
I remember last time we talked, you were benchmarking mini games. Do you still benchmark just another game occasionally to see if these CPUs match up roughly in a different type of game, though?
Yes. Now I just covered both the Intel AMD with World of Warcraft, but I'm planning to do more games as well as productivity application and so on and so forth. So I want to do like a broad coverage of both CPU to see what exactly they excel at. So I will test everything like modern games and application and stuff like that. So. Yeah.
Right, and I just wanted to make sure we said that up front, because people who listen need to know that you do test the other games too before you get your final
I test
advice.
everything. Yes, and usually when I have a new CPU, I spend like a day or two using only that CPU for everything, just to have a real feel, understand. Because if you do a benchmark, you record the number and then you put it on Excel, and then you evaluate by the numbers. But I prefer also to understand the field about using that CPU, from going to Windows, navigating, using YouTube and everything. It gives me a better perspective of the pure number you see in Excel.
Yeah, it's funny. I do the same thing. I mean, I typically just do it with GPUs, but I mean, and I feel bad every time it happens, but it usually takes me I'm not the first one to get a review out. I'm usually like 2 months or more after a product is out, but it's because I actually sat there the 3070 or something or a 3090 or a 6500 XT, and I just actually made myself use it for everything for a month, and I think it's something that's lacking right now, because I think the main thing you gain when you do that is, all right, you unplug the product, you take it out after a month, and you go, do I miss using what I was using before, right? That's really the most important question if you're going to buy something.
Exactly. Yes, because if I have something here, I usually try to swap everything once in a while just to see, to leave it a bit and to see if I miss the other product, or if I have something that I would like more and I try another thing. And maybe I can see that sometimes if you look at the chart, you see something, but in reality it's a bit different, or you find a glitch that, a benefit that is better than the other, even if in a chart it looks below. So
Yeah, I mean, an example that comes to mind actually is, and I always am surprised by what my final opinion is, because I look up charts online, I look at the price, I have my own opinions, but then when I actually test it, like I really didn't like the 3060 very much, because I thought it would be closer to a 3070, and it was in a couple games. But then there were some games where I found areas like in Mountain Blade Bannerlord, which I play a lot, and I was like, this 3070 is 60% better in this battle. Like, this is a massive difference in performance that I don't think most people, this isn't like 30% better. It sometimes is 30% better, but when it got really, really bogged down with like 100 people on screen, the 3060 felt like just way, 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 way weaker than I thought most people were portraying it. And that made me go, I wouldn't pay remotely close to the same price as a 3070, even if it has more RAM.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So one thing that I remember, because I did go back and look at our previous episode, like the list of subjects we covered, one thing that I really appreciated talking to you about a couple years ago is the IPC testing you did with Zen Plus versus Zen 2 at high clock speeds, like 5 gigahertz. I not just to bring up something we've already talked about, but I think it's an important starting point here for a lot of the other stuff we're going to talk about today. Like, I think a lot of people, they see, I don't know, right? Zen 2 is supposed to be like, 15% or something higher IPC than Zen Plus, something like that. And they go, okay, so it's always 15% better. If only we could get it to 5 gigahertz. But you tested it, and you didn't just test it like, you didn't just do Cinebench or CPU-Z and then peace out and say, you actually have a insane cooler that allows you to game at like 5 gigahertz on Zen 2 for hours at a time. Like, what did you find the IPC difference between Zen 2 and Zen Plus was at 5 gigahertz?
I mean, it's not linear, because when you push only the frequency, you have only like a part of the picture, because sometimes there are bottlenecks elsewhere, like the thing I saw in the fiber clock, so in Infinity Fabric speed. So if that is not linear, so at some point, if I raise the clock, I tried even a 6 gigahertz, by the way. So it starts, not giving you the performance you expect, because it's not frequency linear, and you have to raise as well the Infinity Fiber clock to see those gains. So at a certain point, it's pointless to go much above a certain frequency. Like the Intel versus AMD, you cannot compare really clock per clock, because there's a lot of bottleneck that you have to resolve first. So in an ideal world, they will scale. You go like 20% of the clock and you gain 20% of performance. But the world is not ideal. There's still a lot of bottleneck, and especially now in this new architecture that probably we will talk about later, there's a lot of bottleneck that we must figure that out, and try to make some more plain gaming field to be able to, that architecture will shine. And some people will,
Go on.
Some people just, think that raising the frequency or do other stuff will impact. But if they don't do like memory tuning, some people then neglected it. And if you don't do that, you can raise the clock up to 7 gigahertz and see no gains at all.
Yeah, I remember actually when the recent Battlefield came out, and for some reason on PC, everyone just talks about what build they have in the chat on Battlefield. I don't know why, but someone was like, why am I getting a low frame rate? And they're like, I've got I don't remember what he said. I think like a 2070, and then, he had like a, I don't know, I want to say like a Rocket Lake i7 or something. And then I typed to him, what RAM do you have? And he goes, dude, I got 32 gigabytes. And I said, I didn't ask how much. It doesn't really matter. As long as you have over like 10. Like, no, what speed is it? And he was like 2400 megahertz. And I'm like, that's why you're not getting a good frame rate. Battlefield always wants fast memory. Yeah,
that's the point. That's precisely the point. You have to balance everything if you want to to have performance, you have to calculate everything. It's not just you try to mix and match parts and you expect because you have that CPU. You have to make an intelligent build. You have to balance it to find a good balance.
Yeah, what I remember too with your Zen Plus and Zen 2 testing wasn't it? Didn't they like perform the same above 5 gigahertz if they were the same clock speed?
Yes, it's been a lot of time since I checked that result, but
I remember being very close.
Yeah, because at some point, like I said before, I think it was like Zen 2 wasn't scaling anymore above X frequency because the fiber clock was low. I mean, low for the frequency, and that if it was like a 5 gigahertz,
the fabric clock too. I remember us talking about how you thought you'd need like 2400 megahertz FCLK or something.
Yes, I tried like I think it was like 1900 or something, so it was the maximum achievable for that CPU because every CPU have a limit. That was the maximum, but maybe if I had more, probably the CPU was scaling, but it wasn't because the bottleneck was in the fabric clock. And that's
I think that's just important because I remember all these rumors about Zen 2 hitting 5 gigahertz, and I do know some non-final early silicon was tested, of course, at AMD at 5 gigahertz using like over 150 watts, probably 200 to 300 watts. And my guess is AMD tested it, and they're like, it doesn't perform any better, so we should maximize efficiency at like 4.2 gigahertz because pushing a 5 gigahertz SKU out will be completely pointless, and they probably
exactly
like halfway through the design phase, right?
I think I'm almost sure that they're trying to play the card of the efficiency because if they push 25 watt more to have like 1% was pointless. So it's better to keep a lower TDP, play the card that we are more efficient than the competition, or our CPUs are cooler. That is a better benefit anyway for the user. So
have you tested Zen 3 at 5 gigahertz or higher? I looked around your channel and I didn't find it. Like, what did that scale better above 5 gigahertz than Zen 2?
I think I did some funny videos in World of Warcraft with trying to cool down an Intel and then to cool down the AMD using more and more extreme overclocking to see, like a duel. Starting, I think I was like water cooling, and then I went to like minus 50, and then I went to minus 100, and it was like a head-to-head for a while. But then again, we hit some pretty bottleneck, and I think Zen 3 was the one with the performance per clock better than the other two. I tested at the 10900K, and it was like the worst performance per clock, let's say. I mean, like the 11900K was the one that was performing better, and then I mean the 10th generation to be able to match the 11th generation needs like 100 or 200 megahertz more. So,
but once you get to super high clock speeds.
Yeah, super high clock speed. So there was a small improvement from what I see from 10th generation to 11th generation. So it was not a game changer at all. So I mean, 5%, 10%, or even less.
So yeah, that's really interesting too. I saw you test it at 6 gigahertz, the 1100K, the 900K, versus the 10900K, and I guess at 4 gigahertz Rocket Lake, sure, it has like 15% more IPC than Comet Lake, and at this point, it's not even really IPC, it's performance per clock. But once you got close to 6 gigahertz, that the 11900K was like 5% better performance per clock at most compared to Comet Lake. It really makes you wonder again, just this keeps coming up in my mind, like why didn't they just give Comet Lake PCIe 4.0 and skip Rocket Lake? It just... Or maybe for the i5, maybe you release a Rocket Lake i5 or something. I don't know. But it seems like at extreme clock speeds, which Comet Lake can hit, it just was better.
And the thing I noticed as well is that 11th generation wasn't able to reach the clock of the 10th generation. So it was better clock by clock. But the 10th generation was, you have more overclocking potential in the 10th generation than 11th. So more or less, you have more clock from one side and you have more power per clock on the newer one, but you cannot overclock that much. So more or less, it was like the same. So
yeah. So besides like PCIe
yeah.
4.0, just in the PCIe lanes too, I don't even think in the NVMe, if I remember correctly, that was like all Rocket Lake had. That's it.
Yeah, for me, 11th generation didn't bring much of didn't bring anything at all. If I have to think that I have a 10th generation, I have to buy a new motherboard, a new CPU to have what, like 5% more. Maybe if you have if you want to build a new new PC and available that the 11th generation was okay, but as an upgrade, no, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Now it's a different story, but.
QH Freddy writes in and he says, "Hey Max, nice to see you back on here. In previous years, you tested some of Intel and AMD CPUs in World of Warcraft under liquid nitrogen overclocks and found that Ryzen's really didn't tend to fare well because of the difficulty maintaining infinity fabric clocks and the high memory latency. Had you been able to overclock the 5800X3D yet? Do you think that its large L3 cache makes it fare a lot better at these higher clocks? And have you run any of the hardware bot benchmarks on the X3D yet? Any thoughts in that regard?"
This is a nice question. It's complex to explain. So first of all, the 5800X3D is not overclockable CPU, so it's locked. Everything is locked. The only thing you can do is tune in the memory. Then you can do some base clock overclocking, like a Scatterbench, a fellow YouTuber that is pretty nice guy and super technical, is a monster. But to overclock this CPU with higher base clock, you need like the Crosshair Hero Extreme, which have a specific circuit to it for that. Yeah, the Extreme. I have the Crosshair 8, but the Hero, the normal one, let's say the vanilla, that doesn't have that circuit that allow me to go like 104 or something, in base clock. I tested it at 102, so it probably gave me like 100 megahertz or so, but I did in my latest video, there's a lot of benchmark about that, and I didn't gain anything basically. So like if you raise the clock by 2%, you cannot notice the difference. So it's not a CPU that you can overclock. But I think that is pretty useless too, because that massive amount of L3 is able as well to make the memory tuning ineffective. So that amount of L3 cache is so big that mostly everything in the game goes there, and you don't need even to have a memory overclocked. Maybe for the 1% low, yes. If you overclock the memory, if you tune the memory, you have a slightly better, let's say 10% in the 1% lows, in the performance. But talking about average, with a very cheap memory kit or a top-notch, super tuned, there's like 1 FPS difference. And this is a very interesting thing because it allows you to make an upgrade to an older build with this the CPU. Even if you have like a really bad memory, you just swap the CPU, you put the 5800X 3D, and your games will fly. Even if you don't touch anything else.
Because I have a 3950X, and I have the fabric clocks at 1866 FCLK, which is close to the max. And then I have at like a 1-to-1 ratio, but of course doubled my RAM at 3733 megahertz with tight timings. And I mean, look, I like overclocking, so I put a lot of effort into perfectly matching that 3733 megahertz memory with the FCLK clock with my 3950X. It actually gets closer to Zen 3 than I think a lot of people would think. But that's what I have. If someone has like an X370 board or an X470 board with a 2700X, they can upgrade, you're saying, to the 5800X3D and just have 3200 megahertz RAM, and it'll perform almost the same as if they had 4000 megahertz RAM or something.
Exactly. They will, let's say, for a Zen Plus to this one, they will probably gain like double the speed in gaming. So it's like a massive upgrade, like 100% upgrade. And even I tested like with 3200 megahertz XMP. So I just put a 3200 megahertz kit RAM, and that's it. I didn't do anything at all. So just one click in the BIOS, and from Zen Plus to this 3D was like double the performance. So, virtually, because we're talking about a controlled environment when I use a 3090 Kingpin, so at 1080p. So pretty scientific test. So probably if you are playing at 4K, it's not like that. But CPU-wise, you gain like double the performance over a Zen Plus, doing nothing, basically switching the CPU and that's it. So I think this is a very important thing that AMD did, Jack, revamping the old platform before the switching to M5. And they did great with that, yes.
And I think let's go into this conversation right now then, because the whole Alder Lake versus 5800 X3D discussion, which is really the main thing I wanted to talk about. I think what you just said, that example, and what we just talked about, that example of upgrading from an older system, especially if it's 8 cores or less, to a 5800 X3D, that is just a niche the 5800 X3D dominates. And I think AMD knows, because they're not idiots, that there are a lot of people that have a 1700X, a 2700X, a 3600, and they're like, hey, you don't need to do anything. Take off the cooler, put this in. Top of the line Alder Lake gaming performance. You don't need to buy anything new. You can still use your old RAM. You can still use your old RAM with Alder Lake, but better be good RAM, like really good RAM if you plan to do that, unless you're getting a budget Alder Lake CPU, which then it probably doesn't matter. But I think that needs to be stated up front that obviously that is what I would recommend to anyone who has an old system and wants to go from a less than 8 core old CPU to a new one, and you don't have the flashiest memory. But I have to say, I want to know what your opinion is about people building a new system now. Like if you would recommend, right? And this is something people get mad at me about in the comments. But yeah, go on.
AMD probably did the smartest thing they ever did. So with this chip, you have like a very specific target, because it target people who have like an old AM4 builds. So it specifically targeted to that kind of people. They just don't want to swap the CPU and that's it. And I think probably because as you may know, the frequency of the 5800 X3D is lower than a normal 5800. So what I think they did is like recycling chip that wasn't boosting because the silicon quality was bad. They just put the 3D cache in it and they resell it like this. This is what my thought are. They're just recycling chip that doesn't meet the standard of a regular one. They put the 3D cache in it and they sell it. So it is probably the smartest move that AMD did ever, because at the end it's a very nice product. So it's a product that can top the scale in the charts, and just like that, you just swap the CPU into the old build. If we talk about a new build, this is another story. Because
and before you continue, I just want to jump into another thing to make up front. No matter what I recommend, the 5800 X3D makes Intel look silly. Like, because they just threw this thing out there that costs less to make, and they win again at a lot of scenarios. So I do want to be clear that whether or not you would recommend Alder Lake, AMD looks smarter. But go on.
Yeah, it's impressive. It's like the Mortal Kombat fatality. Boom, comes out the new Intel CPU. AMD like snap. Mm-hmm. Here it is.
Basically using 2-year-old technology again.
Yes, probably recycling something that was in the trash can. Something like that. This is my opinion. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know, but I think that it probably is what happened. Recycling something old, put some cache in it, and bam. It was a very smart move. Yeah. So talking about new builds, this is a different story, and there's a lot of if. Because if now I want to build a new system to play the game that I play, you have to make a lot of consideration. It's a tough discussion. I want to make it very easy to understand. So the big if is like, okay, I change now because I need to, because some people try to wait for the new socket. If you need something and you need it right now, I will probably recommend the Intel one. And now I tell you why. There's a big if. So I'm hoping that this time NVIDIA learn from these past errors and make this
you mean
socket.
Intel?
Yeah, Intel, sorry. Intel make this socket at least compatible with the next one, with the Rocket Lake.
It should be.
That was an error. Doing a lot of socket.
Where do we even start with how dumb Intel was? I mean, you needed a new socket for the 9900K. from the 8700K. It's complete nonsense.
Yeah, people remember that, and you lose brand because you lose reputation because they say, oh, come on, Intel every time change the socket, they go with the AMD, and they keep a socket for 3 or 4 generation. So if Intel will, keep the socket for the next one,
based on what I'm told, they will. Raptor Lake is drop-in compatible unless they make a last-minute decision. Let's put it this way, everybody. It absolutely can be compatible. If it isn't, it's because they were stupid. It was a choice. It wasn't because it's not.
Yeah. Okay, let's assume they will keep doing this. So if I have to advise somebody to do a gaming PC, because we are talking about gaming PC, probably the 12th generation will be the best choice, because right now, and probably with the DDR4, because, there's another big if. The big if is if Raptor Lake can be compatible with DDR4 or not. It is. So, okay, if it's true, I will probably try to advise to buy a good DDR4. So probably the best thing right now for a gamer is to buy like, let's say, a ROG Strix DDR4 motherboard, top of the line for DDR4, a good motherboard with good potential in overclocking, and will probably last for years. If you do like the new build with the 5800 X3D, this is the end of the line. So you just make that build, you have to sell it in 3 years or so. With the Intel, probably maybe you have a chance to be able to upgrade it to Raptor Lake or whatever for a gaming build, because now if you can find pretty cheap DDR4 that are BDI or good chips, and easy overclock it to for 4000, for example. That is left the top, let's say the top frequency for the 12th generation in Gear 1, because if you are running DDR5, you will be running Gear 2. If you're running DDR4, you'll be running in Gear 1. So 4,000 is more or less what you want to do. And now I think with 100 and something bucks, you can buy a very nice DDR4 kit.
Yeah, that's why I recently upgraded and just used my old 3600 or megahertz DDR4 for my i5 Alder Lake testing system, because it's compatible, and I was just blown away by how cheap DDR4 is now. I might as well go to 32 gigabytes.
Yeah, exactly. And for what my latest testing was like DDR4 versus DDR5. I tested the 12600K and the 12900K. It turns out that in some cases DDR4 is even a bit faster. So there's no point at all now running DDR5 for two reasons. Because now they are super expensive, so they cost like 6 times or 5 times more to have a very nice kit. And then probably the top of the line DDR5 kit you buy it right now, next year will be rubbish, because now we are talking about 6400 or something like that. Next year probably we will have 8000.
We will, and I just want to warn people, like, here's how I'd put it. Talking to people at like HP and Dell, they're paying 10 to 20% more per gigabyte for DDR5 over DDR4. That's it. That's all it costs more. Right now there's a lot of milking going on Newegg with these, and I just want to warn people, what you're seeing with graphics card prices right now, that's going to happen to DDR5 later this year. So just know if you buy it now, it better be because you have to, because it really, I wouldn't get the top of the line DDR5 because it is going to get cheaper.
Yeah, probably. As always, everything that goes out, they know that there are people enthusiasts, the people that are eager to try out new stuff, and they're able to pay the premium price for the new technology. So they are milking on it for sure. But now, the technology is running very fast. So something that is high-end now, next year will be really a paperclip. So.
Well, and I think there's another facet to building a new system now when you decide between a Zen 3D or an Alder Lake system. It's price. Like, a lot of people talk about how X570 is cheaper, and, let's just say it's $50 cheaper than a nice X690 board. Sure. But also the i5, I don't know why no one talks about this. Yes, I understand the 5800X3D is like effectively tied with a 12900K, maybe 1%. It depends on which website I go to. 1% better, 1% worse. But the i5's 5% weaker than that at gaming and costs $250 in the US right now.
Yes, I mean, I love the 12600K because with a good memory tuning, something daily, nothing extreme, so something that everybody can do, uh, is at least in World of Warcraft, we are like 5 FPS difference. So like what is one is like 207 FPS, the other one is like 2000.
Yeah.
Sorry, 200. So there's like 5-7
And
FPS
you're already
difference.
at 200. So, like, what are we even?
Yeah,
Most
exactly.
people game at 120 at most.
So the i5, the actual K version i5, I think is probably the best buy right now. If somebody asks me what is the best CPU for World of Warcraft, i5 12 600K, and a decent pair of memory. And I think if you take in mind that with the price of the CPU and the money that you have left compared to the 5800 X3D, you have the money to buy a good DDR4 kit and even save money.
And am I wrong that the i5 needs less of the super fast memory compared to the i9? Like, it's the i9 that benefits more from DDR5. No, I think at least I saw Hardware Unboxed find that 6400 megahertz memory does help the i9, but maybe not the lower end ones as much.
Again, here we are talking about bottlenecks. For what I see, the i9 is a monster because I had some issue with my Apex board, so I wasn't able to go faster than 6600 with the memory, because it's still bottlenecking at that speed. So let's say they are similar now, the i9 and the i5, both have the same speed, which is like the best I was able to was like 6600. The i9 can do much more, but it needs more memory, so it probably is like a bit how can I say it? It's chained to the memory speed right now. So the i9 can do better than this. But maybe if we have like faster RAM in the future, the i9 will be able to perform better. So it's not that the i5 it does not benefit. It's just the i9 will do more.
Right. Today's video is brought to you by cdkeyoffer.com. As I put together a new benchmarking station for 2022, I know that whether it's running Windows 10 or Windows 11, I will be getting that key from cdkeyoffer.com. And that's because it's a reliable, long-term sponsor of Moore's Law is Dead that gets you reasonable prices on legitimate keys for these types of products. But it's really not all that they offer. They also can give you keys for Microsoft Office, keys for PlayStation codes, and even some of the latest PC releases like Elden Ring, a game that I'm enjoying quite a bit. Whatever you need, CDKey Offer probably has you covered. And they're always running sales, but make sure you use the best code possible. And that's the ones provided for the Moore's Law is Dead fans. Moore's Law is Dead fans get the biggest discount. And if you go to the link on screen or in the description, you can use code BROKENSILICON to get 25% off Microsoft products and DieShrink to get 3% off everything else on the website. Using these codes really does help Moore's Law is Dead, and it helps you pay reasonable prices for games that you want and keys that, frankly, you just have to use half of the time. So, again, use the link in the description, use Broken Silicon, use DieShrink depending on the products you're getting, and pay reasonable prices for keys today at cdkeyoffer.com. And so I guess that's something to think about too, is the whole Raptor Lake upgrade. That's why if you're min-maxing price performance, I recommend DDR4 with the i5, because even if you upgrade to Raptor Lake and a Raptor Lake i7, which should be basically the equivalent of an Alder, actually a little better than an Alder Lake i9 later this year, you don't need to get the i7 right away either. Like, these CPUs, I'm pretty sure, are going to drop in price quickly because we have Raptor Lake, then Zen 4, then Meteor Lake next year, then the next year Arrow Lake, next to Zen 5. So there's going to be a lot of generations coming up. So you could also just wait for that. I mean, look how cheap some Zen 3 CPUs are getting after 2 years. What do you think is going to happen when there's more competition? I think those Raptor Lake CPUs are going to drop in price quickly. And who knows, maybe you'll get a $250 i5 now, and then you'll get a $250 Raptor Lake i7 near the end of next year, you know?
Probably,
and you cannot do that with the 5800 X3D. Now, at the same time, you know, by then maybe you'll be looking at Zen 5 anyways, but I don't. It's just so hard for me to recommend building a new system with a 5800X3D if you want a budget build or a crazy build. But I think in the middle, it really kind of dominates a ton if you already have a motherboard.
Yes, I think they have different user target. Because I recently did a poll, I think yesterday, in my Twitter account. I didn't get much result, like 50 people, voting, but I saw that like 7% was like I'm going with Intel, like 50%. I will go with the 5800 X3D if I have an AM4 motherboard, and like another 40% straight away with even if they don't have. So people are more toward AMD. Maybe I don't know if it's something like fanboy or something that AMD is more popular.
Well,
but
to give some benefit of the doubt, I would say I think there is just a massive mindshare advantage now. And what you're saying is backed up by some distributors I've talked to that own like micro centers and stuff. They can't keep the 5800X3D in stock at $450. And so whether or not it's the best choice, a lot of people are buying it either way, right? I think a lot of it is people who already have the motherboards, though, to be honest.
They will be happy anyway because it's a very nice CPU. It's a very nice CPU, and honestly, 16 threads are a lot. Mm-hmm. Even if you do like some, video editing stuff like home using, if you're not a professional that needs a lot of core, it's still a nice CPU. And I think nobody will be, regretting the decision to buy the CPU because it's obviously a very nice one. You can game, you can do productivity, you can do a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm. But if you do productivity, the i7's $380, and that has more threads. Or wait, does it have more? Yeah, it has 8 plus. Yeah, it has 20, more threads.
Yeah.
So I think that's worth keeping in mind too. The i5's 5% weaker. In some productivity, it actually beats the 5800X3, but generally speaking, it's about tied. The i7 is better productivity, is 2% weaker. The i9, well, it blows it away in productivity, to be honest.
Yes,
and so
that's why
any productivity.
Yeah. That's for a new build that will go with Intel right now, because they do a lot of stuff and they do everything well. The 5800 X3D is like a game-focused CPU right now, because if you need do big rendering, whether you can go with the 5950X or a Threadripper. But if you are a gamer, that is the CPU that is worth buying. But if you do a bit of everything, or if you want something that is more flexible, Core i9 or the i7 is a nice CPU. And it can match the gaming performance of the other. So it needs a bit of tweaking, but there's like guides about everything now. So
I'm honestly a bit disappointed there isn't a 5950 X3D, because I would have upgraded to that if it was an option, but it's not. And if it's not, to be honest, I don't have any problem running my games at 120 hertz with the 3950X anyways.
I think probably they didn't do because probably it was a hit in the frequency, and maybe the application that was designed to, so a lot of multi-threaded application rely a lot on frequency, and maybe if they had a bigger L3 cache, the gain for that specific application was not enough to justify a production for that CPU. So even probably there are some applications that prefer to have a higher frequency than a bigger L3. So I think they did that calculation. So to keep the 3D technology for gaming and not for professional application, because if I have like a 5950 that runs at, 4.6 in multi-threading, and then I have the 3D version running at 4.2, overall the performance are less.
Well, that brings up an interesting question, like which SKUs should get Vcache. Coal Addict writes in, he says, "Hi, Tom and Max. Which Zen 4 models do you expect we'll see getting 3D stacked cache variants later this year? It seems like a double-edged sword in that the lower tier models won't gain much from it, whereas higher tier risk thermal problems. Do you expect them to release one for the highest end model at this time?" And I don't, I've been talking to some people. I suspect most of Zen 4 is still not going to have Vcache at launch, but if they can get out a Vcache laden 8-core with Zen 4, with, the high clock speeds and massive IPC increase on top, I feel like they should, though, at least do the 8-core so that Raptor Lake has no chance of winning in gaming performance, right?
This is a nice question because I think there's a lot of strategy in that. So I think probably they will do, if they are smart, they will do like a Ryzen 5 with Vcache. So for the budget gamer, to have like, super performance with a low price. Probably an 8 core as well, if they're smart. Maybe the an high-end like the 7950X normal and with Vcache. But one probably with a higher frequency and the other one with Vcache and lower frequency. Because again, when you enter in the high performance depth of computing, a workstation, stuff like that, there's a lot of difference in application requirements. So some application requires a lot of RAM, some needs bare frequency, some need a faster L3 cache. So there's a lot of use case that they must consider before launching a product. So probably if they see fit, they will do probably both. The 3D version with lower clocks and another one with without and a higher clocks. This is my guess.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to how competitive Raptor Lake is. If Raptor Lake is surprisingly a real threat to Zen 4, then I feel like if they wanted to, you're right, they could do 7600X through 7950X, all with Vcache. Yeah. They could do all of them if they wanted to, or at least half of them, and like the non-Vcache model for people who don't need that. But personally, if Zen 4 blows Raptor Lake out of the water, which I think it certainly could, I feel like they're not going to give you Vcache below the 7800 because why? They know gamers will pay for it. They can't keep the 5800 X3D in stock, so why would they give it to why they give it to the plebs? I don't know why they would.
Correct. If they can capitalize on that, why not?
What are you expecting out of the performance of Zen 4 versus Raptor Lake? And just to recap, what I'm expecting out of Raptor Lake is 8 big cores, 16 little cores, so doubling the amount of little cores, 8 to 15% higher single threading. Now, that's probably from like a 3 to 5% IPC increase, and then like a 3 to 5%. So that'd be like 4% times 4%, or so you get almost to around 10% higher single threading, maybe 15%. And that means turbo boost probably above 5.7 gigahertz or around 5.7 gigahertz or around there. Like I said, gigahertz. And then all P-core turbo boost. I do expect all the P-cores on the top A9 to hit 5.5 gigahertz. And that means 30 to 40% higher multi-threading. So that's Raptor Lake. And then with Zen 4, I think they may bring out some boutique higher core count models. But for right now, the plan is 16 cores above 5 gigahertz with 20 to 40% higher IPC, which for the people who are paying attention, if you're getting 10% higher single threaded with Raptor Lake, but double the little cores, and that gets you 40% higher multi-threading, well, Zen 4, 20 to 40% higher IPC. It's about the same amount more multi-threading as Raptor Lake are being. So I think it can be competitive. So how do you expect this to shake out when we have two generations well above 5 gigahertz, it seems like?
Yeah, I think it's a very interesting time to be in the CPU, competitive fight, because right now we have amazing technology on both sides, competitive pricing as well, and performance that are, I think, let's say, overkill for most gamers right now with this generation. So the next one generation will be even better. AMD have the benefit that they don't need to make small little cores, efficiency core, because they are already efficient on the main cores. So this is the strength of AMD. They have they can just put some the core that are very efficient. They have a very good algorithm for the boost. So the Zen CPUs are very smart. So they can play with power, they can play with efficiency, they can give you a very fast and small burst in frequency when the CPU, when the game or the application needs it, and maintain a sustained, all-core boost with efficiency. This is the main strength of AMD. Intel took another road, having performance core and small efficient one, which is fine. It's more tricky, for like the Windows scheduler, stuff like that. So they need more ecosystem built around that. So AMD is more like raw power. Everything is like is not hardware. Intel needs more like ecosystem to make it work properly, because now the E-cores gave you some trouble in some games. So I saw that you have to manually set the cache to avoid dips in performance, or to disable the core in some games. So it's a more different architecture, but probably they will fix the issue with the new generation. Probably Zen.
And I think that's why they have 8 little cores with Alder Lake, because I've seen people ask me that, like, why didn't they give it more little cores from the beginning? And it's because they knew they would have to fix it before they bring out 16 little cores with Raptor Lake. And they're kind of taking this year of Alder Lake being out to try to get it working perfectly.
Yeah, I think there needs some tuning, like I said, like in Windows, because you don't want to have like a lot of small cores, and the application on the games will run to that small cores, and it will completely destroy the performance. So they need tweakings as well, like they need tweak for DDR5, and I think Zen 4 will be impacted by DDR5, because every time you change a platform and you put a new memory, we will have months of bugged BIOS, because I'm pretty sure that everything at launch will be a mess. So this is for sure. Intel took this step now, so probably the next generation of DDR5 system from Intel will be a bit more used to handle DDR5. It's a very interesting stuff we will see with this generation. So yeah, probably the Zen 4 will be using 3D cache. They will be using higher frequency. Maybe what I really hope that will do, they will try to run the fabric faster.
Mm-hmm.
Because again,
who knows? That's something I can't even confirm yet, is like exactly what's going on with the fabric clock, because this is an entirely new generation. So who knows if that, and a new platform, who knows if this
maybe it's not needed.
Maybe we don't even worry about it anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all about speculation right now, and at the end, I would like to have one here to see what they change, what not, because I usually try to I like to speculate. Sometimes I push the CPU with liquid nitrogen and everything to see the limits, to see exactly where the bottleneck is at a stupid high frequency. Some people say, yeah, what you do is like useless, because you do something that is super extreme and doesn't is not practical at all. But I know it's like Formula One, but I discover limits on doing that. It's fun first, and then I do that to understand the limits and to, let's say, to predict where they can fix. They can fix something in the next generation. And I think it worked. 2 years ago we did that, and I more or less predicted everything that was happening. So I think it's a good method to understand.
So you bringing up the bugs in a new platform is an interesting thing to bring up, because I know one of the main AMD considered an X670 for Zen 3, but they said it'd be slightly better. X570 has no bugs anymore. Why don't we just keep using X570 so it's well supported? Intel has that advantage now with Raptor Lake. They'll have a platform that's well supported, has the bugs worked out, has the scheduling stuff, DDR5 support figured out. And AMD's the one where you're going to have to worry, is it really ready? Dr. Forbin writes in, he says, hello, Tom and Max. I own a few AMD rigs, though I suspect AM5 may be in my future. I have a rig with an R7 2700X into an ROG Crosshair X370 with 32 gigabytes of RAM that I'm keeping as an emulation box. And then I also plan on upgrading my X470 ROG Crosshair build with a 5800X or X3D and a new GPU too. Anyways, I feel a platform with DDR5 is going to have ridiculous costs, and it seems to me basically any new platform has issues besides cost. I mean, look at the issues Intel has had with some games in Windows 11. So is it a good idea to wait for AM5 since I'm not a pro gamer, or should I be holding off on upgrading to buy it? Like, because he's basically asking, should I be waiting to buy AM5 at the end of the year if it's just going to have bugs anyways?
I mean, I think it's an interesting question, as always, because people have to make, to ask themselves a lot of questions before buying, because you maybe are wasting money, you're wasting time. So it's wise to carefully evaluate, your upgrading path. And I think AM5 will be, to not, understating anything, will be a mess for the first month. So you buy everything, a good AM5 motherboard, a good CPU, and then you have to start tweaking with the BIOS. And then you will see strange things, because Like, I remember when AMD launched Zen 1. It was a mess. For the first probably 3 or 4 months, RAM wasn't working below JDEC, so above JDEC. So I think I expect maybe not like that. But if I buy an M5,
AMD's better at it now. I bet they don't have as many problems. At least I suspect. I can't promise.
Yeah, I think AM5 you have to take in consideration and part of the bill some of tweaking and spending some times around bugs or the BIOS version. So this is something that will be considered. I mean, he should be like the perfect candidate for the 5800 X3D because you already have a good AM4 motherboard. You want to change the GPU, so probably it might get along well with that CPU, or it depends, because it depends a lot of what you do. If you are a gamer and you do only gaming, maybe the 5800 X3D is okay until Zen 6.
But then you'll be waiting for Zen 7.
Yeah, exactly. So you have to see the actual. When I upgrade something, I need to understand if I change something now, what benefit brings me, and what money I have to spend to have that benefit, or it's better to wait. At some point, you end up like my PC is low, I'm getting mad every day, so I have to change it now. Mm-hmm. And probably you have to do it like this, because if you want to wait the new generation, you will end up waiting forever, because everything is better than the previous. As is normal. So to answer to him, I don't know. M5 will be probably difficult at the beginning. The 5800 X3D is a plug and play. M5 will be plug and play. So this is a consideration that you should do.
Well, yeah, I'd say I think Zen 4s is definitely going to come out by, if I had to guess, it's going to come out like beginning of Q4, end of Q3 this year. I would say if you could wait, and that's, like 6 months from now, if you can wait 6 more months, why can't you wait 7? Like, let's say there's a bunch of bugs when it comes out. Okay,
yeah,
so
exactly.
wait 1 more month, and then maybe prices will come down. I don't know, maybe not. Maybe it'll be so in demand that you won't be able to get one, but I just don't. I think this year is going to be more like 2019 than 2020. It'll be more like when Zen 2 came out, where, it was in demand, but you could get it. I think, and especially with Intel having Raptor Lake, even if Raptor Lake isn't as good as Zen 4, it's still way better than, like Coffee Lake versus Zen. It's still way more competitive than where Intel was before. So that's going to force some competition for availability and pricing that I think means you're not going to have to wait like half a year to get your hands on Zen 4. Just wait an extra 2 months, wait for the BIOSes to be updated, and then you'll be fine. And for all we know, it'll work perfectly at launch. Like, I'm pretty sure AMD's going to want to be honest, what I hear about Zen 4 is that if they really wanted to, they could launch it this summer, but they want DDR5 to get cheaper first. And they want to launch without the bugs Zen 2 had, because they just don't want to do that again.
That would be wise, yes. And as well, you have to consider as well the used market. So let's say you wait 7 months, you want to see if the AM5 is okay or is going to drive you mad. And if it's going to drive you mad, okay, let's buy the 5800 X3D. You can buy it second hand, and probably you will spend less, and the CPU doesn't really, you cannot ruin a CPU because you buy the second hand, so it's a safe buy. And probably you will end up like paying $350 for something that is really performing with bugs free, and then you wait Zen 6 and you upgrade like that. So it's always good if you're not like me, that I'm addicted to technology, that I want the last technology like now. It's usually better to wait like 2 months, 3 months to see how it's doing,
And I think this leans into the next question too. Alex writes in and he says, I have a 3700X on an MSI X570 Meg Ace I primarily game on. And 1440p with a 2080 Ti. But I do multitask. I watch YouTube, monitor Discord, and have multiple game launchers updating all the time in the background while I'm gaming. And from time to time, even light content creation. It's nothing the 3700X can't handle for now. So any upgrade to a Ryzen 5000 CPU is going to be a big uplift. But my main question is, as I'm looking to maximize my platform longevity, measured in years, against the demands of future games and software, how should I balance the faster cores of a 5900X or 5900 or 5950X against the Vcache of a 5800X3D? Should I go up core count or up Vcache? For reference, one retailer here has the 5800X3D for 409 pounds, and the 5900X is 359 pounds, and the 5950X is 499 pounds. I think there's a fair few in a similar situation to me, so I really would appreciate your thoughts, and I'm sure others will as well. My answer to him is, you said nothing the 3700X can't handle, then why are you upgrading?
Yeah, this is a good point. Fair point. I mean, especially if you are playing at 1440p. Okay, the 2080 Ti is not a bad GPU is still a good GPU. And probably for most of the game, he's GPU limited. Mm-hmm. So maybe if probably I think it was like Battlefield 5 or something that was really, really heavy on the multi-threading performance, but not every game use a lot of cores, so probably it's better to spend money on GPU. Well, right now it's still it's a tricky time to be changing the GPUs. But
here's the thing. Actually, I don't know about where you live, which I believe is in Spain, but in the US, the 6700 XT was in stock at MSRP at AMD.com until like 2 p.m. today, and the 6900 XT is too. Yeah. So it's getting better.
It's getting better. Yeah. A lot. I see like 40% less in 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So now the prices are getting, like, I think there was like the 3060 Ti at like 400 and something, 470. So okay, pretty decent price for a decent GPU. Not yet at MSRP, but I think the e-tailer doesn't want to scalp too much right now because they saw the pricing decreasing, so probably they want to avoid to keep stock too much. Mm-hmm. Probably with backlash, they buy a lot of stock and then the price starts dropping, and they lose a lot of money.
Oh, so they're freaking out right now, the ones I talk to, because that
scalper probably.
Well, that 3060 Ti selling for €470. They probably bought it for 440. So they know if they go down lower, they're going to lose money. So I'm sure, but honestly, there's nothing they can do anymore. These prices are going to keep going down, and I think they know it. They're just trying to get away with the extra $10 they can.
So, okay, let's say that the GPU market is healthy again. To answer to Alex, yes, the 3700X is a pretty nice CPU. So probably, unless you are playing games like World of Warcraft or like, I don't know, Warzone, for example.
At there are 200
or like they're like Star Wars or the Republic, I think. There are a few games that really benefit from a really fast CPU in single thread. So if it's playing like a AAA game, probably that CPU will handle for years. And probably it's better to invest money in a powerful GPU. So it really depends of the habits on the user. So it's hard to if you don't read some titles, it's hard to give an advice right now, because the 3700X is a all around nice CPU. You can do almost everything nicely. Then if you want to excel or to play like 240 Hz, okay, that's a different story. You have to understand and to mold, to make the build accordingly to that specific usage.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say it seems like he mostly games. I mean, it still is 8 cores, so I would actually kind of lean towards the 5800 X3D over the other higher core count CPUs.
Probably yes.
Unless you end up, like, if the 5950X was the same price, it'd be hard for me to not get double the cores, if I do some content creation. But for him, that seems like the right choice. But again, the only question I would have is there any game you're not maxing out the frame rate on with your CPU? If there are a few, then it's like, maybe if you want to, treat yourself right now, why not? But if there's not because sometimes if there's not literally a single game that you're not maxing out the frame rate on, the longer you wait, the better the stuff's going to be. And not just this year, but next year and the year after as well. I don't know what you think about this. Like, let me just put things in perspective. So we've covered how good, of course, Raptor Lake and Zen 4 is likely to be this year. But I believe Q2 next year, we're going to get Meteor Lake. I don't know if it increases cores over Raptor Lake, but I do know it brings 10 to 20% higher IPC again. And then it's going to bring specialized accelerator blocks like neural engines and different encoding things, and way better integrated graphics. And then right after that comes Zen 5, which I hear has Zen 4 like IPC gains again, and accelerator blocks again, and probably more cores again. It's very hard for me to... I'm excited about Zen 4 because I'm excited that when I have a Zen 2 CPU, Zen 4 is probably going to be over twice as good. That's really cool. But I know Zen 5 is going to be at least 50% better than that. So how do you feel about that? Like telling people to upgrade when every year stuff's going to be 50 to 100% better. It's crazy.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard because I think now we are hitting like the overkill range. So I mean, I think with the next generation, we probably will be really overkill because you don't need too much CPU power if you are playing games. I mean, if you're talking like gaming, like we are now approaching a limit that even an i3 can make you game pretty nice. So if I think, now the i3, the current i3, I have here a 1200F, so the $100 CPU, and it's doing great. I mean, I can play a game at 160 FPS with that. Okay, I have only 4 plus 4 cores, so it's a very small CPU, not for multitasking, but for gaming, I can play really nice with that. And if I think the architecture, it was like the old 8700K, so more or less, even a new small CPU will be a beast. And probably
that's an interesting thing to bring up, by the way, too, is like if we're talking about budget builds, you don't even need to get the i5 12600K. You could get that i3, and as long as you're not trying to game above 120 hertz, you could just
do that as well.
DDR4, and then guess what? Later this year or next year when it gets cheaper, you can $300 will probably buy you what would it be then, like a 16 core i7 next year?
Exactly.
You go from 4 to 16 cores next year, and just why not do that?
That can be smart. Start with the i3, see if it's okay for you, and then upgrading later on maybe in the used market, because there's always people that want the new technology and they sell the other one for cheap because they need cash to buy the new one. Maybe you can find an i7 for cheap. This is a good strategy. It needs a bit of knowing and looking, but it pays off.
But what do you think's going to happen then because I just want to put things in perspective, because I do think eventually game developers are going to find something to do with all of this horsepower. They will. Once, for example, like you said, the current i3 is as strong as an 8700K. That's crazy. Yeah. Like, what happens though when an i3, which I think it's entirely plausible, a Meteor Lake i3 is as good as a 9900K. Like, what happens when, like, even budget laptops have gaming CPUs better than what we had 5 years ago? I'm sure developers will find something to use that for in video games, but I don't think that's going to happen for a few years. I don't think right away they're going to use that. So what do you think's going to happen, though? Like, again, like right now, Zen 4, if it has, let's just say it's, 50% better than Zen 3, which was 30% better than, like, we're looking at double the performance of Zen 2, I'd say, at least. What happens when Zen 5 is 50%? So 3 times better? Like, what are we even going to recommend people buy when we have things 3 times better than a 3950X for $180 or something? Exactly.
And there's a very important thing that you bring out. Let's say I can compare the 1200F, the small chip and everything, and then 9900K, so the X top of the line. But the small one, now let's say World of Warcraft, perform way better in the 1% lows. Why? Because they made some changes at the hardware level, from security stuff and I think it was the spectrum, so the mitigation for that kind of threat. So now they are on hardware, and the smallest CPU right now is performing better than the top old one because they put something in silicon. So threat mitigation around in silicon, and before that, the 9900K was really performing bad in the 1% low because of that. So sometimes there are more instruction in the CPU that newer generation have integrated by default on hardware level.
Mm-hmm.
So probably, yes, the game developer will develop more on more core, but it's going to take time. So probably I think like Intel, maybe they try to integrate something apart from the cores, like machine learning stuff, instruction, everything that is like an accessory. Video decoder, for example.
Yeah.
I'm a Mac user for my editing stuff, and back in the day, Intel was very nice to have like the quick sync technology to help you decode video and code video faster. And probably maybe they will do something like that. They cannot run for frequency or IPC forever. They can scale with core, they can run more IPC, of course, but I think they will integrate some function to step up the game a bit. And the game developer, maybe they will take advantage of that. More multi-threading, more advanced function, something like that. This is my idea.
No, I think so too. I think, because I leaked, God, is that already a year ago? I did a micro
Time flies.
Yeah, it's something about Meteor Lake where I got confirmation that Meteor Lake is going to have a built-in neural engine for accelerating all different types of media. And I talked to one of the people at Intel, like working on it, like, why now? Why not before? And they're like, well, we have 8 cores, and then we have a bunch of little cores for multi-threading. And then after that, it's like we could add more little cores, or we could add a neural engine that specific tasks is 1,000 times faster. And yeah, maybe it'll only apply to 10, 20% of the things you can do. But would we rather make everything 5% better or make 10% of the things you do 1,000 times better?
Yeah, look at NVIDIA with the Tensor Core. NVIDIA with the Tensor Core, Apple with the M1. They're trying to move in different ways, apart from the cores, the pure core power. So I think it's wise to make CPUs smarter. Smarter and more to do more function at once.
Manor Down writes in. He says, "Hola, Max and Tom. How does testing 0.1% lows versus 1% lows differ in importance? Does the user feel 0.1% lows more? Lastly, how do you avoid measuring frame drops in a game due to assists being loaded in? Hitching while the game is loading and starting is not due to the CPU, or it's not, well, it is kind of due to the CPU, but it's not like what you'll experience while you're actually gaming. And that is a thing that annoys me all the time when I'm benchmarking."
This is a nice question. So let's say you have the average. That is something that you normally perceive, naked eyes. Okay, so the average is like, if you check your FPS once in a while, is what you see usually. This is the average. Then you have the 1% lows. 1% lows are, let's say, when the CPU is stressed. For example, you do a multiplayer, you go like in a zone when there's a lot of player, the CPU will be stressed. So you will probably seeing the 1% low numbers. So when you're working in a very stressful situation for the CPU, you will probably see the FPS of the 1% in that specific time. Then you will see a spike to see the FPS rise again. But when you are in a stressful situation, you will see the 1% low numbers. And then you have the 0.1% low. That is like the worst case scenario. So you go like in a very populated area in a multiplayer game, everybody start casting spells, shooting, doing a lot of crazy stuff, and then you will hit the 0.1% low. So it's like the lowest spike the game will do. So let's say average is if you play solo or if you play something that is easy for the game to process. 1% low is when you are in a very tough zone that the CPU is stressed, okay, or the GPU is stressed for what matter the same. So the system. Let's talk about the system because there's not only CPU. So what the 1% low is when the system is stressed a lot, and you see like a big drop in FPS. Sometimes a big drop, sometimes not. And the 0.1% is the worst case scenario. So
like the stuttering, that's when it feels like it's just hitching.
Sometimes it's stuttering, sometimes not. For example, we are talking about the 9900K, the old CPU, no? Mm-hmm. you have a very nice average, like 140 FPS on average in World of Warcraft in raid. And raid is where there's a lot of people, casting spells, so like 40 people at once casting spell. You have a very nice average, but when the people start doing, bad stuff, the 9900K was like having, let's say, 60 FPS of 1% low. And the Zen 2, that had a lot of cache, a lot of L3 cache, it was like at 100. So it was like double the 9900K. The 9900K was having a higher average, but was failing in the 1% low. And the most important stuff is the 1% low, because if you are in a multiplayer game and you play, and there's a lot of, you have to concentrate and do, crazy stuff with the boss, and that's where you need the 1% low. If a CPU or a GPU, for that matter, fail to deliver 1% low, you have a bad experience.
So would you say when people look at like a benchmark between CPUs or even GPUs, and a lot of websites now show all of them, they show average 1 and 0.1% lows. If they see two graphics cards that have similar averages, tied 1%, but one of them wins 0.1%, is that, well, obviously if it's a tie for everything else, you would do that. But like, let's say one is winning 1%, the other is winning 0.1%. Which one would you say is more important to win? And does that ever happen? Because I think it does sometimes.
No,
it's rare, though.
Usually it scales. So the average may be different. So the average may be, let's say, I have a system. Let's talk about systems so we can be more universal. I have a system or component that gave me like 180 FPS and on average, but like 60 FPS on 1% or 0.1%. They usually tend to be the same, to keep the scaling between the two. And another CPU that gave me 150 FPS on average, but 120.1%, I will stick with the one that guarantee me the 0.1%. Because if I can have a higher 1% or 0.1%, I don't perceive stuttering at all. I don't care if in an empty zone I have like 1,000 FPS.
Yeah.
But when I engage in a fight and then I start, seeing the screen stuttering like hell. So the most probably I will buy components looking at the 1% lows, not the average.
Well, yeah, and I typically do too. And let me give you an example of some real bad 1% lows. I recently tested the RTX 3050, RX 6500 XT, RX 560, and I also tested a 663 gigabyte and a GTX 583 gigabyte in modern games. And if you want some bad 0.1% lows, try using an old graphics card, because I think people forget how often like older GPUs were getting horrible frame stuttering compared to what we're used to now. Like every generation, especially since I'd say Turing and RDNA 1 has been significantly better frame pacing. Like my friend who has the 6500 XT now, he said he went from like a 480 to a 6500 XT. And even when the frame rates were similar, the 6500 XT just felt smoother. He's like, newer graphics cards just work better. And it's like, they do. They really do.
They do. And driver level as well.
Yeah, let me ask a pedantic question then. You said usually 0.1% and 1% lows are directly correlated. Is there a point in testing 1% if you just test 0.1%? Or is it tested at the same time anyway, so it doesn't really matter?
It's tested at the same time. So I usually use like Afterburner, MSI Afterburner, or Capframe X to record. So when I record the session, and then to answer the question, how can I avoid the loading time? I just, load the game and select a benchmark range that doesn't have a loading at all. So I can, I try to find a part of the game that doesn't have a loading time, so doesn't have any variable at all. So I want to benchmark something that is consistent every time I run it, without loading times or without variables. So usually I record more data than I show. So sometimes I record 1% low, 0.1% low. Sometimes I record as well like maximum frame rate or like temperature. I record a lot of stuff. I keep a really lot of log. And then I pick the information that seems relevant as well to double check if I found something weird. Sometimes you can see like spike in in temperature, spike down in frequency. You can understand a lot by analyzing the logs, and then you pick only the numbers that are relevant.
Well, it's officially spring, which for me and my dog Reese means getting outside and growing some fresh food in our garden. And also, it means having to mow the lawn every week, having to take care of weeds, and just having to maintain the yard in general, which means that, yeah, during the spring and summer months, I like having a quick snack that I can make so I waste as little time as possible now that I'm spending more time taking care of my yard. But I also, of course, want it to be healthy and tasty, and, well, yeah, that's where Vite Ramen comes in. Vite Ramen is an American company that, just like me, likes using fresh ingredients to make meals tasty and healthy. And it only takes a few minutes to make, and they keep updating their recipe, like the V3 edition of beef pho recently, to keep ensuring their product is as good as it can be. So make sure, even if you bought them before, you check back at their store. And if you do, click on the link in the description and use the offer code BrokenSilicon to save 10% on a special bundle just for Moore's Law is Dead fans. That gives you $25 in free goodies, and it really does help support this channel tremendously. Seriously, I eat Vite Ramen. It's tasty, it's healthy, it's fresh, and it's especially reasonably priced if you use the Moore's Law is Dead deal. Try Vite Ramen today. All right, then I want to try to switch gears here. And it's funny, as I get ready to read this reader mail, it's occurring to me, I don't know if this will be a video episode, I'm wearing an AMD shirt. I meant to put on my Moore's Law is Dead shirt, but I guess now it looks like I'm just representing AMD, even though I guess I mostly recommended Alder Lake anyways. Well, and I guess behind you, yeah, you've got a couple Intel processors, so I guess that balances out me wearing an AMD shirt. The Remedy writes in and he says, do you think AMD would have been able to catch up to Intel with Zen if Intel hadn't gone stagnant for nearly a decade? Would Zen have stood a chance against a consistently innovating Intel, or was a stagnant Intel the thing that really allowed AMD to catch up, and a blessing in disguise for consumers since Bulldozer and Piledriver were so bad it nearly made AMD go out of business?
This is a fun question. Hard to say. Probably if Intel was pushing, 100%, maybe yes, because Intel is a big company, have a lot of resources, have a lot of knowledge, have a lot of skilled people inside. So probably they will, who knows? Maybe AMD, with Zen, did a great service to humanity. So they moved Intel from stagnation. So they did a very big thing. But hard to say. But I think yes, Intel is a big company with a lot of R&D budget. They will probably be more advanced by now, yes.
Well, to be entirely honest, too, I've seen some older roadmaps from Intel, and they wanted Cannon Lake to be out because, Skylake came out 2015. They wanted Cannon Lake out potentially with 6 cores by 2017, and then they wanted it would probably have been Cannon Lake, which is a die shrink of Skylake. They probably wanted that out instead of KB Lake with slight improvements. And then I believe the next year they wanted 6 cores. And then they wanted Ice Lake 8 cores out in 2019. And I think that's interesting, or even 2018 actually is what I've heard. So I think that's interesting to think about. Like, what if Intel had an 8-core Ice Lake at 5 gigahertz, which, remember, Ice Lake is 20% higher IPC than Skylake. What if they had that next to Zen Plus? I mean, Zen Plus wouldn't have looked, even Zen 2 would have been questionable for gaming if Intel had something 20-30% better than the 9900K at the same time.
Yeah. Something that in the past, Intel was downclocking the CPUs. Mm-hmm. Because from my from an overclocker perspective, what I saw that in the past Intel was so far advanced that it was able to clock something at 4.7, but then you buy the CPU and you can run at 5.1 effortless. Now they are really struggling to push for more frequency. They are improving the boost algorithm. They are making the KS version, all that stuff, because they struggle they sell already being CPU. But 6 years ago, they was heavily downclocking the CPU because there was no competition.
Yeah, and just to be honest, NVIDIA was doing that for a while as well. If anyone's wondering,
yeah, exactly.
If you look at the
Maxwell.
Yeah, I mean, come on, guys. The 970 was a 3 point.
Rebranding.
Like, everyone freaked out that the 970 was only $330. $330. And it's like, yeah, because that was the 960 Ti that they called a 970. Exactly. And it used 120 watts, you guys. There's no way. If they really wanted to, the 980 would have been clocked 20% faster and been called the 970. Like, that's what they actually would have done if they really were threatened by AMD back then. And Pascal was massively holding back. I mean, people forget that the Fury X used about the same energy as the 980 Ti. They could have been pushing all these way harder, and you see that with Ampere. It's like, oh, this is what they do when they're actually threatened. They just use 20-30% more energy.
Yeah, they play with that all the time, I think.
And I want to be clear, there's a reason they do this that isn't just because they have to. The reason they don't clock Maxwell so high at stock is because, well, when the 1070 came out, it was a little faster than Titan Maxwell, and everyone freaked out, like, wow. But what people were missing is if you overclock Titan Maxwell and the 1070, Maxwell wins. And so it allows them to make their newer generation look even more impressive if they need to, if something goes wrong, if they underclock the previous one, which was pretty important with like Sandy Bridge and Ivy Bridge, by the way.
Good times. Yeah. Now it's a bit different. Now everybody is pushing to the edge. They are trying to make more sophisticated algorithm to be able to squeeze everything out of it. At least in the CPU, but maybe in the GPU as well, because they got better and better and better every time.
So Brett Summers writes in, and he says, hello, Tom and Max. I hope you guys are doing well. I just have a simple question, though. Do you think traditional overclocking is dead? I mean, you can still do it. You can certainly tweak certain things, but not like back in the early Nehalem, Sandy Bridge, or Core 2 days. It seems to me that unless you have exotic cooling, your overclocking will generally be limited and restricted to only a few things to get only a few more percentage points of performance out of it.
Yeah, this is a very nice question, and I feel it personal because being an overclocker, I love overclocking stuff. And I started really overclocking really hard during the Athlon XP era, so 20 years ago now. And at the time, yes, was really big improvement over a couple of settings. Now it's a bit different because everything came out of the factory already overclocked with a complex boost, like they say, the 5800 X3D with the cache. Mm-hmm. You don't even have to tune the memory, so you just plug and play, and it's not overclockable by default. But even if it was, it doesn't make sense to overclock. So maybe overclock maybe it's not dead. Probably is like evolving. Mm-hmm. Let's say it's not that it's going to die because they locked everything. They let you play. Probably they will let you play for a long time. But I think now it's more shifting to tuning. Let's say more than overclocking is more like tuning, to find the setting that perform better for your workload, to tune the memory in some cases, or to play with disabling, enabling features to be able to have more performance out of it. It's more like shifting into tuning than purely overclocking. So it's more a broad things to do than simply pump the clock higher as possible.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about tweaking settings for better performance, there's still quite a lot to get out of it. I remember my i7 6700K. In terms of actual overclocking, if all you did is overclock the multipliers, you're getting like 5-10% more performance. It really wasn't even that much back then. But I remember overclocking the, how was it? It's like I forgot by now. It's like the cache clock, and keeping the cache clock at the same clock as the core clock, and then overclocking the RAM got me really, really good 1% lows.
The ring, yes,
yes,
so-called ring. The cache, of course, is the cache, and now more or less the same as well now. So you have the cache, the memory. So you still have a lot of point of bottleneck that you have to improve to be able to achieve the performance you want. So maybe with the 12th generation, the ring is not as a good point as before, because again, maybe they change something, the architecture is not important. But yes, with the 6th generation, or even with the 10th generation, the ring is very important. So you still have things to tweak, and I think probably both AMD and Intel want to give people things to tweak, because they know that fanatics like us, mostly they buy the PC for playing with the PC and not playing games. So they know that people need to tweak, have a deep need of tweaking things, and so they want to keep it entertaining. Maybe
I spent a lot of time tweaking memory timings and FCLK clock on my Zen too, and that wasn't the core. For me, I just found turn PBO on and forget the multiplier. That was all I did with that. But I gained like 10% more performance tweaking the FCLK with RAM. That's the same as overclocking the core.
Exactly. I always tell people overclocking memory, tuning memory is free, so why not?
Mm-hmm. It doesn't even really use more energy, so
exactly. And sometimes you can even spare some energy or temperature, because sometimes you can get more efficiency out of that, and sometimes you can push the memory and downclock the core. You have probably like the more performance with less energy. Something that I will probably try to make some content about that to.
So Agent 2 writes in, and he says, "Hello, Tom and Max. Greetings from Turin, pun intended." He's referencing AMD's Turin EPYC architecture. He says, "My question is one I've been asking myself for a while now. When will the revival of Intel's Costa Rica fabs make a difference in the battle against TSMC? This news dropped a few years ago now. Oh, how time has flown. And it said at the time that this move would take a while to bear fruit for Intel. Do you know any new info about this project? Now, Intel plans to accelerate their node development to counter TSMC. Contrary to popular opinion, I think that their own fabs at Intel will be to their own advantage once again, because under competent leadership, which Patrick, I've never heard someone say Pat Gelsinger is proving to be, and they will be able to tightly integrate their products to a level Apple and TSMC are only doing right now. And if they keep up the level of innovation on the fab and architecture side equally, then they would be a dangerous prospect for competitors. Sorry for the little rant or for going on for too long, but I haven't heard much from Intel's fab progress lately, and I'm getting a bit anxious on how it is progressing. Keep on rocking." Yeah, so thanks, Agent 2. I mean, I would just say having fabs all over the world definitely helps right now when you have to worry about different geopolitical issues. I will say this, though, and this is something I'm getting into looking at like RDNA 3 and 4, which at least one of those is 3D stacked, and looking at like Vcache on Zen 3. I mean, they're putting Vcache on there before Intel is, despite having their own fab. So I think it is an advantage for Intel, but I think it's obvious AMD and TSMC are working really closely together.
Yeah, this is a very broad topic. I mean, probably they choose those strategies with a lot in mind. Let's say geopolitical situation right now, supplier availability. We saw with the COVID thing that it was hard to find everything. So probably they have a really very broad strategy to do the thing they do. And as well, Apple is doing a lot of stuff, building their own silicon. It's hard to say.
Let's go into that now. Yeah. I mean, I saw you did a video recently looking at the M1 Meteors, I believe.
It's the one that I'm using right now.
Oh, that's what you're using right now. So what do you think about Apple products right now? I think, wasn't there... If I remember correctly, the last time me and you talked, there were all these rumors about Apple making their own silicon, and here we are 2 years later. Not only are they making it, there's several generations.
They're crashing it. Yeah, they're crashing it. Really, I'm using Apple since a long time because all the video editing stuff and photo editing, I use macOS because I'm more like a best of breed kind of user. So creative stuff, I use Apple. For gaming, I use Windows. For server, I use Linux. So I'm very, I pick what I think is best in the market at the moment. And Apple is really killing it because, I'm a user with the Mac M1. I have the small Mac Mini, and that I do my video are all 4K. So usually I record everything in 4K. I do it like in uncompressed RAW format, and I put it in the Mac Mini and it digests everything. So I can edit my video in 4K real time. So, and the rendering is almost real time. I just had to, I just wait like for a 10-minute video, we probably is like 20 minutes to process, to encode. And all the other rest
full
is
4K, yeah.
Yeah, in full 4K, 60 FPS, and everything else is real time. Rendering is real time. I'm editing with best quality in real time with a chip that is using 15 watts, and it's stunning. If I do the same with I have a Threadripper here, the 64 core, so the big Threadripper here. I try to use video editing stuff with the Threadripper, and it's not fast enough as the Mac Mini, and it's unbelievably, it's hard to process, that a high-end 64 core is not as fast enough as a small, thing that I have on my desktop. So Apple is definitely killing it, and now with the, the M1 Max Ultra or something like that, stupid name, I think it's going to compete in the high-end GPU market as well very soon, because they found a way to make everything super efficient.
Well, I mean, and that's the funny thing too, is I know how they did it. Their chip is huge.
Of course, yeah, it's huge.
It's 5 nanometer, and it's like, but
a Threadripper.
But still, no matter what they managed to do is make a like 100, 120 watt, 3070, 3080, and that's pretty crazy, And it again has a CPU too.
The efficiency is unbelievable, because if I think I can do everything I do with 15 watts, if they scale this 15 watts to 10x what I have here right now, it's probably a super overkill machine for everybody.
I'm sure someone in the comments will tell me why this isn't a thing yet, but I gotta wonder if having these decent graphics finally available on Apple will push Steam to push for better support of their games on Apple hardware. I'm sure there's some
probably
ecosystem reason, but that Gabe Newell maybe doesn't like it. But with all of the effort he's putting into making Linux compete with Windows, you'd think he'd also want to put in a little effort into making all of the games on Steam work well with Apple. So again, he can avoid Microsoft trying to control him,
Probably they should, because I tried some game on Linux, and I tried some games on macOS as well. Especially World of Warcraft can run as well on macOS with Metal. And with the M1, I can play at... I can if I lower, of course, the graphics detail, but I can play in 4K with the back M1 in World of Warcraft, which is a more CPU-intensive game. But with this small piece of hardware, I can play a game at a decent resolution with decent quality in the first early version of the chip. So yes, they will probably, probably with the Mac M2, I think it will be something more evolved in the GPU segment, and maybe they will try to develop more on that, because it's very efficient. So you can have something maybe as well in the mobile segment. Let's say a new MacBook now with a chip M1 can be a nice
gaming on battery.
Yeah, gaming on battery, because it's super efficient. Maybe you can game at 15 watts and game for 9 hours straight with something that actually deliver decent performance. Maybe you cannot expect like 3090 performance, but you can play something decent, and maybe if they see the opportunity, they will start to make gaming for that. So let's say now AMD over the years have pushed for more cores, so the developer now are using more cores. So sometimes you have to ignite a spark in the industry, and when a developer sees something that they can do better, they will.
Dope as Jay writes, and he says, considering the competition we've had in the consumer CPU space these past couple of years and next-gen consoles being equipped with 8 cores and 16-thread processors, establishing a new baseline for development, how do you see CPUs being pushed by developers now that we're getting a lot of cores and in ridiculous IPC gains?
Just exactly what I was saying, so I didn't read that. So yeah, just what I was talking about. So if a developer see that they can use some power from an architecture, they will. So why not utilize 16 thread if you have it? And now, nowadays, except the i3, at least 8 threads. You have 8 threads or 10 or 12 that you can use. So probably yes. Going on, we will see more of multi-threaded gaming. We will see more more stuff using everything a PC or a system have. So it's normal.
I think short term, what we're going to see is high refresh rate gaming become completely standardized. Like, I think I've always recommend people do this. Go back to like 2008 and read some GPU reviews on the internet, because you will see plenty of reviews say, hey, this graphics card can run a game above 30 frames per second. That's good enough. And then consoles came out that were, 360 and PS3 were pretty powerful when they came out. And then we got way stronger CPUs, especially with like Sandy Bridge and onward. And so then PC gamers got used to 60 frames. Now we have consoles that have 60 frames per second as standard. A few of them do 120. And I think what we're going to see is, at first, the consoles are competitive with mid-range gaming PCs in the CPU department, probably a little more in the GPU. And then eventually, though, what happens when Zen 4 has double the IPC of what's in a PS5? Well, I think you're going to see just developers go, well, okay, well, now every game just runs at 120 hertz without issue, because it wasn't always easy to run at 120 hertz without issues in the past. Like, sometimes the engines just wouldn't even support it.
Yeah, depends a lot on the engine. Let's say World of Warcraft, for example, I speak with that because it's a clear example of a game that is recycled every time, expansion after expansion, and is still single-threaded right now after 20 years. So they try to do some multi-threading stuff. It's like more like offloading from the main core, but it's still. But games that are developed with newer engine, maybe the new Unreal Engine, everything, it will be fully multi-threaded, I think. Because we are in 2022, so it's normal that they will use the new technology at their advantage.
Yeah, and I think you're just going to see finally. I think people need to go back and look at 360, especially 360 games, but also most PS3 games. There are usually just like 5 or 6 enemies on screen, and now we have stronger CPUs. Now there's like 20. It's like I think what you're going to see is developers not afraid to have like hundreds of people on screen if they want to, because now they can. Mustang 3060 Ty writes in, and he says, how do you think AMD's APUs stack up against low-end GPUs? Do you think APUs will take over the low-end GPU market in the future?
I think they already have, to some extent, because I started my channel like, what was that, 4 years ago with the first APU from AMD. And at the time, it was like, battling with low-end discrete cards. So, and right now, let's say with the the 5700G, the big AMD CPU with the integrated GPU is still it's like more for an indie gamer right now, because you don't have a lot of power.
But it still uses Vega, like they have Rembrandt. They could give you better stuff.
If now they will put RDNA2 into a Zen 3 core, it will be great. I mean, probably you will have like a 100-watt mini PC that can do stuff that you can do with a 1050 or something like this, maybe 1060. If you're lucky, if you tune or overclock, the memory, something like that, because I think they are advancing pretty well in that segment. They are a bit stagnant though, because I saw, utilizing Vega for a lot of generation, and they are very stagnant right now. But I think they will, take the rabbit out of the hat, maybe with the RDNA2 inside of Zen 3, because you don't need, if you have an APU, you don't need the latest core, So probably a Zen 2 will be just as good.
Yeah, but I think Phoenix, despite some other claims out there, isn't going to be this giant upgrade in graphics people expect. Now it's going to be, and I mean Phoenix over Rembrandt with a Zen 4 APU. It's going to be a big uplift, but I don't think it's going to be like a doubling. I think we're looking at another standard 30 to 50%, contrary again to what some other people have said recently. And again, I think that's good enough for 1080p. I think late next year, I think after Phoenix and with Meteor Lake, that's when we're going to start to see it. And granted, I think these low-end compared to GPUs, I think there will be low-end graphics. But right now, on laptop, Rembrandt's graphics are about as good, like you said, as a 1050 Ti, which isn't great. But if you doubled that, as much as that will probably be a fourth the performance of like a $200 graphics card, so what? It still does 1080p high settings, and once you hit 1080p high settings at 60, I think that's just where AMD is going to be like, enough. There you go. There's the cheap
sometimes
thing.
you tweak a bit with it. Usually AMD doesn't work well with the shadows, so you lower a bit down the shadows, and then you can have a pretty decent quality without shadow or without water reflections, stuff like that doesn't really change the overall perception of the perceived quality of the game. So you can tune a bit the setting, and you have a nice gaming machine.
All right. Final question here that I wanted to pick your brain on. Like I'm really excited to pick everyone I talk to's brain on right now is power consumption. The Remedy writes in again, and he says, hello, Tom and Max. With the rising energy costs across the globe, inflation being a real concern at the moment in many regions, do you think that PC component power consumption, mainly graphics cards, but I think CPUs still apply, will start to become a major focus of the general consumer? Or will it still generally be all about frame rates at all costs? Even then, efficiency for a frame sounds like a great metric to a lot of people when said out loud, but it still doesn't limit power consumption as you still have a very power-hungry card, potentially, despite improving efficiency. Do you think there will ever be a limit to wattages where people just say, all right, enough. I've had enough of this. This is the highest we're going.
This is a very nice question. The ridiculous limit, there won't be any red line to it, because even if NVIDIA comes out with a 1 kilowatt GPU, probably the people at some time they say, okay, if I have the top performance, who cares about 1 gigawatt?
But
GPU.
In the US, we have 120 volt power. You have 240 volts in Europe, and 120 volts, that'll trip the breaker. Like literally, we're out.
Yeah, a lot of
I think the limit to a room is about 1800 watts in the US.
Well, now here we have double the voltage, so we have half the current. So, but still, having a big GPU, it means you have to buy a big PSU, and that thing doesn't come cheap. I mean, if you have to buy a 2000 watt PSU, it's like $500. So it starts getting really expensive, and of course, and the noise, the heat consumption, and as well you're going to have a tropical temperature in your room. So.
And what if you live in a tropical temperature and then you try to power it? Because I'm just saying this, I've been told directly the 4090 uses 600 watts, or that's what it's being designed to use. So I wonder what you think about that. I don't know, you said you have a 3090 now, right?
Yeah, well, I have more or less everything. Yes, I have every GPU. Right now here in my bench, I have the 3090 Kingpin. So it's the unlocked version. I have a special BIOS for extreme overclocking they gave me. And it's further unlocked than the normal 3090.
What power consumption does it get to then? Do you have it at 600 watts?
So I have the Kingpin, I have the display. So I see real time my consumption is. I saw 600 watts. Sometimes.
So how hot does that get? So you know how hot a 600 watt card gets. What does it feel like in the room? Because I think that's going to become standard apparently.
It's a room heater. I have it comes with a 360 all in one. So okay, but if I do a lot of benchmark, or when I have to test something to do a review, so I have to do 200 benchmark. Mm-hmm. If I don't open the windows, even in winter, it's getting 30 degrees here. So sometimes in winter I have to power on the air conditioning, because when I do test, I test at 22 degrees. So when I do all my tests to make it scientific reliable, I fix my room temperature at 22. And sometimes I have to wait that the air conditioning start cooling down a bit, because if I do 3 hours straight with especially if I use a 12900K overclocked, is at the 400 watts, so I have 1 kilowatts of energy burning for 3 or 4 hours. But you end up with a lot of power.
Yeah, so that's interesting. Yeah, and 30 degrees Celsius is 86 degrees Fahrenheit.
Yeah.
So that's really, and that's in the winter. It'll get that hot if you don't leave the windows open.
Exactly.
I'm just really fascinated to see what reviewers say about a 600 watt card. Because how can that
it's too much.
Be a con?
Personally, I think it's too much. I mean, it's unethically too much. Mm-hmm. Because at the end, 600 watts to have what, like 20 FPS more than a car that deliver more or less the same result with like half the wattage. I think is like a bit dumb, it's like when I overclock stuff. If I want to do a record, let's say with that card, I saw 900 watt with the 3090 Kingpin overclocked, or something like that, 800 watts. When I was like with liquid nitrogen at 2.7 gigahertz on the GPU core, I saw the because I have the Tor, the ROG Tor, the PSU, and I saw like 800 watts to do like a small percentage increase to set a score in other bot.
So which is what it's really about, though, right? Like, NVIDIA doesn't want to lose. That's the only reason they're doing this, and they know if it gets to the top of the chart or close, mission accomplished.
I will probably buy that card and then downclocked. Because maybe you have like 5% less with half the power.
They'd have to come with, I feel like it's going to have to come with two BIOSes, like one switch that limits it to 400 watts, because I mean, there are just some houses that won't be able to run that card. Like, seriously, there are some apartments that won't run.
Yeah, you will trip your counter, yes. Because if you are running like at 120 volts, is a lot of amperes. So yeah, you will probably trip the switch.
But if it doubles the performance of your 3090. Double the efficiency.
But it won't. No, probably you will like twice the power to have like 20% more.
Well, I'm saying versus your 3090 because it's a 4 nanometer graphics card. So technically, though, they can claim they doubled efficiency even if it's still using 600 watts.
They always does. But well, I think it's good to talk about consumption and this some green stuff, because usually people buy the PC to have performance and they don't. If a very small population of the gamer or the PC user think about efficiency and power consumption, but we should probably be more responsible for that.
Well, it's funny, you say you game a lot even on your Mac, and it's like I ever since I've had a 3070, I'm just about at this level of performance where it's more of a balance of I just don't want to get hot in the room. Like, I don't care. I'll turn down a few settings to have it be a cool room to game in. It's just not as much of a factor anymore because the games look so good to me now. Yeah,
I mean, my perfect build would be like fanless. So if I have to design a build, it would be like fanless. To do exactly what I want to do, nothing less, nothing more. But to be fanless and silent and super reliable, no moving parts, and it will be my best build in my mind. But unfortunately, there's no, let's say, GPU heatsink strong enough to...
I know there's a couple of crazy cases I've seen like 5 or 6 years ago where the entire case is a giant metal heat sink for cooling the CPU. Cool. But of course, the GPU, you're right. The GPU is still needs a fan, though, unfortunately.
I will probably make a model about something like that. I will probably do that. Because now you can do with the CPU is easy.
Right? Couldn't you liquid cool the GPU with the CPU and just have the heat pipes run all through a giant metal case back and forth? Maybe that would work.
I had a project to do something with mineral oil. So to put like, a big heat sink in the CPU and GPU and submerge everything in mineral oil. And build like a case that can dissipate for convection, having the heat dissipate itself. But it's a bit messy. So I will probably work around that to find something that is zero noise, but still performing enough to play a game at 144 FPS.
Well, I mean, we've been going on for a while here, so I think that's all of the things I had to bring up on the script. I think we got through all of it pretty well. Is there anything else you wanted to discuss while you're here? I mean, anything you wanted to talk about, or?
Well, we covered a lot of stuff, pretty interesting stuff, I can say. We covered a lot. I think now it's just, sit and wait to the new generations, speculate a bit because it's fun. Probably in the next weeks, I will do some strange tests to see efficiency, power consumption. Something that I want to do is like something that I did in the past generation to use an Noctua NH15 without the fans. with AMD and Intel and to see the performance I can have with both using that heatsink without the fans and to save limits. So this is a test, let's say a challenge that I want to do. So using a complete fanless design, who the two can deliver the best performance, let's say under 80 degrees Celsius.
Mm-hmm.
So this is something we'll probably do.
Yeah, that'll be interesting because it all, and I imagine like it'll really depend on if you underclock them too, because it's some of that's also a little bit about surface area. But not really if it's a heatsink, because you're just going to saturate it if it's not moving out. So it's really actually probably less about surface area. Well, where can people find that test? Like, what's your channel? Plug yourself.
Yeah, as always, Hardware Numbers in YouTube. You'll pretty find me. As always, I will do some liquid nitrogen stuff and more crazy tests. So if people want to see some unusual test with system push to the limit, they can, follow me and they will see some really out of the box tests. And if I can, one thing, I have a team of modders, the Italian extreme modders. So we have a YouTube channel as well that sometimes I do tests for them. So the channel name is Italian Extreme Modders, and they do a lot of case modding. They shape the case to a team. They are pretty nice. So if people are into modding, I suggest to check it out.
Well, I'll put both of those links at the top of the links section in the description for people who want to find those. I'm sure there's a lot of Moore's Law is Dead fans who will be looking for that. But otherwise, thanks for coming on. Remember, everyone listening, if you double check that you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel, ring the bell button, subscribe to Broken Silicon on their preferred podcast app, and give us a review, and consider supporting us on Patreon to ask us like this questions and get the episodes early and ad free. But that's all I've got today. And again, thanks for coming on, Max.
Thank you for having me. Bye.
Goodbye, everybody. This podcast was brought to you by the YouTube channel and website Moore's Law is Dead. Moore's Law is Dead and Broken Silicon are trademarks of their creator, Tom. That guy is me, and I am indeed the creator, editor, writer, and showrunner of Moore's Law is Dead podcasts, videos, articles, and other media. However, I don't do this alone. Moore's Law is Dead is a team with Broken Silicon co-hosted by my brother, Dan, audio editing by Gerard Cortez, and special assistance by Carbon Cry. Find all of our information, including the information of sponsors you can support, at www.mooreslawsdead.com. If you would like to send fan mail or hardware to us, please mail parcels to Moore's Law is Dead at P.O. Box 60632 in Nashville, Tennessee, zip code 37206. And speaking of fans, patrons are what makes Moore's Law is Dead content possible. The aging business model of spamming ads all over the content is dying. The future of media will be built on fans paying for the content they actually want to exist. And so if you have the extra money, but only if you do, please consider supporting us. For just $2 a month, you get access to the exclusive podcast Die Shrink, voting on subjects of future podcast episodes, the ability to have your questions read aloud on Broken Silicon, Die Shrink, and Loose Ends, and of course, access to the Moore's Law is Dead Discord, full of like-minded people who would love to meet you and talk to you about computer hardware. I am one of them. Additionally, higher tiers get access to ad-free episodes of Broken Silicon, the entire back catalog of Flyover States podcasts and other projects Moore's Law is Dead has done, and thanks in the credits of videos and other perks as well. And hey, if you can't afford to support us, please do share Moore's Law is Dead videos and podcasts with friends and family on social media, Reddit, and forums, and give Broken Silicon a 5-star review on Apple Podcast or your preferred podcast app. All of this really does help so much. And if you'd like to advertise on the podcast, hire Tom for consulting, or are a person of interest who would like to be a guest, please reach out to the email address mlhbdead@gmail.com. But as I said, this podcast would not be possible without its patrons supporting it, and so now it is time to give a personal thanks to the greatest of the fans. The following supporters are at the 10 gigahertz or higher producer levels: Brad Medlin, Drita Full, AV, Anthony Gareffa, Greg Pataki, Mohammed Al-Khawari, Brett Jones, Aaron Close, BBC 6800XT, Big Sexy, Jan Rauner, Daniel Hyde, Ivan K, Brian Regelman, Joaquin Hagen, Sam Miller, Deke, Thomas Rupp, The Mechanical Philosopher, Terrence Harrod, SNES Chalmers, Tom Bailey, Greg T. Wanchuk, Andrew S., Dane Galanowski, Daniel D., MJB1, Eric Jackson, Justice Brennan, Sammy Good, Valco Malev, The Boss Haas, I Love You, Lynn and Jim, Spamtum G. Spamtum, Jonathan, Jeremy So, General Drips, Blake, Franco Frederic, Matthew Lazier, Jensen Wang, Nathan Mose, Azuris, Gregory S. Acker, Dominique Koch, Jake Dude 23, Jake Martin, My Name is Nobody, Caillou Markelli, Hard4Room.com, Original Ross, Licky, Stefan, David Cowden, Ricky Tan, who also survived Rush Hour 2, Christopher A. Butler, Jeremy Scalen, Sarcastro, Stephen Hart, Jason B., Meat and Pork, Stu, Tim Robb, Luis Correa, Ian Clifford, Jesse Jaskowiak, Travis Gooding, Holden Mobley, Nanny and Chris Rich, Deepest Learners, Mad, Suzu Taylor, Stephen Coates, Michael McGee, Benjamin Oshley, Sam Malas, Greg, Trin E., Patrick Groh, Amiable Chief, Brett Summersdale, Russell, Arcane 311, Tommy, Kuden, Brucha, Mark Mitchell, John Wissink, Delmaine Peterson, James Anderson, A. Truey, Mark Raidmaker, Falling from Sky, 3DS Boy 08, Hal Buma, Narithio Matthew, Landavazzo, Stefan, Koladik, Henry Zhang, Judson NF7, GOS, The Grid, Michelle Pell, D31337, Anchik, Sylvanos, Noah Noquela, Hexapuma, Chrysantine, Powell, Zegartowski, Zavebeat03, D6, Thomas A. Teef, John DeBunt, DNA Tech, 50C Desert, Axel Cisneros, Royce Mayer, Charles Russell, Reginald Araya, Moore F1 US, Teak Autumn, Jackson Miller, JS MMH, Sandy Garrido Saunderson, David Eason, Fire Falcon on YouTube, Andre A. Jacques, Gamin Since Reagan, Jeff Sadler, Eric Osborne, Loophole 35, Windstar Joker, James 1 Raidmaker, Corey Leonard, and of course, thank you to Sahara for the music.